The color of deceit, the taste of forgiveness. Distinguished listeners, today we present The Color of Deceit, the Taste of Forgiveness, a gripping tale woven with betrayal, loss, and the arduous journey towards healing. Young Lorenzo arrives in Milan with dreams, only to have them brutally shattered by a cruel deception. His path soon intertwines with the enigmatic Signora Elena and her innocent daughter Alessandra, pulling him into a treacherous web where family secrets fester and the past casts a long, menacing shadow. When the bitter taste of deceit turns to the unexpected weight of profound responsibility, Lorenzo must confront not only his cunning betrayers, but also the complex depths of human connection and the elusive nature of true forgiveness. Before you immerse yourselves in this compelling story, please take a moment to subscribe for more captivating narratives. Now, we invite you to listen. The biting wind, a serrated blade honed on the icy peaks of the Alps, clawed at Lorenzo, Visconti's threadbare coat as he stood on the grimy platform of Milan's Centrale station. It wasn't just the cold that gnawed at his bones. It was the chill of a grand deception, a betrayal that had stripped him not only of his inheritance, but also of the very ground beneath his feet. The cavernous hall, a monument to a bygone era of grandeur now echoing with the hurried footsteps of strangers and the rattling announcements that blurred into an indistinguishable drone, felt less like a gateway to opportunity and more like the maw of a colossal, indifferent beast, its throat lined with the sharp edges of his shattered dreams. He clutched the worn leather satchel containing the phantom remnants of his inheritance, a sum that had once shimmered with the promise of a new life, a resurgence of the Visconti name, now reduced to a dishearteningly thin wad of euros and a sheaf of useless, expertly forged documents. His knuckles, white against the aged hide, were testament to the desperate grip he held onto a future that had dissolved like mist. Lorenzo, at 23, was a study in contrasts, a canvas upon which hardship and a stubborn, flickering hope had painted conflicting strokes. His frame still held the lean elegance of his aristocratic lineage, a heritage now more a burden of expectation than a source of privilege. The aristocratic nose, a subtle curve of nobility, was now framed by the nascent etchings of worry around eyes the color of a stormy Ligurian sea, a deep, turbulent blue that often held a flicker of artistic yearning, a stark contrast to the grim determination that currently shadowed them. His hands, though calloused from years of laboring on his family's dwindling vineyard in the sun-drenched hills of Tuscany, still possessed a certain refined grace, the ghost of a pianist's touch, a reminder of a gentler past. The faint scent of sun-baked earth and the rhythmic rustling of grapevines, once the comforting embrace of home, were now a distant, aching memory. He had arrived in Milan 3 days prior, buoyed by the charismatic assurances of Signor Riccardo Rossi, a man he'd encountered through an online investment forum dedicated to burgeoning agricultural technologies. Riccardo, with his impeccably tailored suits that seemed to whisper luxury, his silver tongue that dripped with promises of exponential returns, and an air of effortless sophistication, had painted a vivid picture of a revolutionary hydroponics venture on the outskirts of the city. He had spoken of sustainable agriculture, of bridging the gap between tradition and innovation, appealing directly to Lorenzo's deep-seated love for the land and his desperate, almost desperate need to restore his family's fortunes. He had whispered of new horizons, of a phoenix rising from the ashes of old debts and faded glories, and Lorenzo, starved for hope, had devoured every word. The memory of their initial meetings, held in the hushed opulence of a cafe near the Duomo, now felt like a cruel mirage, shimmering deceptively in the desert of his despair. Riccardo had exuded an aura of genuine passion, sketching elaborate diagrams on linen napkins with a flourish, his eyes gleaming with what Lorenzo had naively believed to be shared enthusiasm. He had spoken of Lorenzo's family history, feigning admiration for their centuries-old connection to the land, cleverly weaving flattery into his persuasive narrative. Lorenzo, blinded by the desperate allure of escaping the slow, agonizing decline of his family's estate, had poured his entire inheritance into Riccardo's venture, a desperate gamble against the encroaching tide of poverty. It was a leap of faith, a desperate clutching at a lifeline that had instead become a noose. The revelation had come with the cold, brutal efficiency of a slammed door. The address Riccardo had provided for the state-of-the-art hydroponics facility, turned out to be a derelict warehouse, its windows shattered like vacant eyes that had witnessed too much despair, the air thick with the stench of decay and neglect. Ricardo's phone number was disconnected. His online profiles vanished into the digital ether, leaving behind only the echoing void of his promises. Lorenzo's vibrant hope, so recently a burning ember, had withered into a bitter, choking dust, leaving behind only the raw, exposed nerves of betrayal. As he stood amidst the throng of indifferent travelers, a profound loneliness settled upon Lorenzo, heavy and suffocating like a shroud. Milan, the city of dreams and ambition, felt vast and unforgiving, its glittering facade a stark mockery of his own shattered illusions. He was a stranger in a strange land, stripped bare not only of his financial resources, but also of the comforting familiarity of his Tuscan home, the rhythmic rustling of grapevines now a distant, aching memory that brought only a pang of homesickness. He was a castaway on a concrete ocean, surrounded by a million indifferent waves, just as despair threatened to engulf him entirely. A flicker of movement at the edge of his vision caught his attention. A small, unassuming island amidst the chaos. A young woman no older than himself, with hair the color of sun-ripened wheat cascading down her back, was struggling with an overflowing cart, laden with what appeared to be freshly baked goods. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her lips pressed into a thin line of effort, as if she were wrestling with an invisible opponent. For a fleeting moment, her intense focus on her task seemed to create a small island of purpose amidst the surrounding chaos, a quiet defiance against the indifferent flow of humanity. Then disaster, small yet significant, struck. As she attempted to navigate a particularly crowded section of the platform, one of the cart's ancient, weary wheels snagged on a loose cobblestone. With a heart-stopping lurch, the cart tilted precariously, sending a cascade of golden brown pastries, croissants, maritozzi, sfogliatelle, tumbling onto the grimy ground, scattering like fallen stars. A collective groan, a murmur of mild irritation rippled through the nearby commuters, their hurried pace momentarily arrested by the unexpected disruption. Lorenzo, despite his own crushing predicament, felt a sharp pang of sympathy for the young woman. Her face, moments before etched with determination, now crumpled in dismay, a silent testament to the fragile nature of small victories. He watched as she knelt down, her shoulders shaking slightly, attempting to salvage what she could of her fallen wares, her movements imbued with a heartbreaking mixture of frustration and resignation. It was a scene of everyday tragedy, yet it resonated deeply with his own profound loss. But it wasn't just her obvious distress that drew Lorenzo in. As she gathered the scattered pastries, a small, intricately carved wooden bird, no bigger than his thumb, fell from her apron pocket. It was a simple object, yet something about its delicate craftsmanship, the smooth, worn texture of the wood, resonated deeply within him. It was the kind of object his own grandmother, a woman with hands as gnarled as ancient olive trees and a spirit as indomitable, used to carve during the long winter evenings in Tuscany. A sudden, inexplicable pang of nostalgia, sharp and poignant, pierced through his despair, a fleeting warmth in the glacial chill of his Milanese reality. It was a whisper from a world he had lost, a world of authenticity and simple beauty, so unlike the polished treachery that had brought him here. He found himself moving almost involuntarily, his long legs carrying him through the throng of people towards the distressed young woman. As he drew closer, he could see the sheen of unshed tears in her eyes, the way her lower lip trembled slightly as she tried to maintain her composure, a brave facade cracking under the weight of her small misfortune. The air around her carried the warm, comforting scent of yeast and sugar, a stark contrast to the cold, metallic tang of the train station, a fleeting scent of home that pulled him in. Permesso? Lorenzo's voice, rough from disuse and emotion, cut through the murmuring crowd, a hesitant ripple in the sea of indifference. The young woman looked up, her eyes, the warm brown of rich Italian earth, widening in surprise. A smudge of flour dusted her cheek, a testament to her honest labor. For a brief moment their gazes locked, and in that instant Lorenzo felt a strange, inexplicable connection to this stranger, a shared vulnerability in the face of life's unexpected blows. It was a fleeting, unspoken acknowledgement of kindred spirits, both caught in the merciless currents of fate. Before she could respond, a gruff voice boomed from behind Lorenzo. Alessandra! What in God's name happened here? You're blocking the entire passageway. A stout, middle-aged woman, with a stern face and hands that looked accustomed to hard work, bustled forward. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her apron was stained with various culinary remnants, badges of honor from a life spent in the fragrant chaos of a kitchen. This, Lorenzo instinctively knew, must be Signora Elena, the owner of the ill-fated pastry cart, and the formidable force behind the establishment. Alessandra, the young woman, quickly scrambled to her feet, her cheeks flushing crimson, a stark contrast to the flour dusting her skin. "Mama, the wheel got stuck, I'm so sorry." Her voice was soft, laced with a hint of fear, a child's plea for understanding. Signora Elena's gaze swept over the scattered pastries, her expression hardening, a storm gathering in her dark eyes. "Sorry isn't going to put bread on the table, Alessandra. We can barely make ends meet as it is, and now this." Her voice, though sharp, held an undercurrent of weariness, a deep-seated exhaustion that Lorenzo couldn't ignore. It was the sound of relentless struggle, a sound he knew all too well from his own dwindling vineyard. It was at this moment, driven by a sudden impulse he couldn't quite explain, that Lorenzo spoke again. "Signora," he said, his voice surprisingly steady, betraying none of the turmoil raging within him. Perhaps I can be of assistance." Both women turned to him, their expressions a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, like two wary birds eyeing a strange seed. Lorenzo, despite the gnawing emptiness in his own pockets, felt a strange surge of determination, a flicker of purpose in the darkness. He had been a fool, a naive dreamer easily taken advantage of, but witnessing Alessandra's genuine distress, the familiar scent of honest labor clinging to her, and the poignant memory evoked by the small wooden bird, had stirred something within him, a yearning not just for survival but for meaning. He might be penniless, but he wasn't entirely without resources. He had his hands, his strength, his willingness to work, and a desperate need to find some semblance of purpose in this alien city, a quiet defiance against the crushing weight of his misfortune. I don't have much," Lorenzo continued, his gaze shifting between the two women, a hesitant plea in his stormy blue eyes. "But I am strong, and I am not afraid of hard work. If you need help cleaning up, or anything else, a place to work, a place to sleep, I will earn my keep." He trailed off, unsure of what he could realistically offer, yet his earnestness was palpable, a raw plea for a chance. Signora Elena scrutinized him, her dark eyes sharp and assessing, piercing through his worn coat and the faint air of faded nobility that still clung to him. She took in the earnestness in his eyes, the subtle lines of a man who had known both privilege and toil. Alessandra watched him with a hesitant curiosity, her warm brown eyes holding a flicker of something akin to hope, a silent plea for a kind stranger. The bustling sounds of the train station seemed to fade into the background as the three of them stood there, an unlikely tableau of despair, resilience, and an unexpected offer of help amidst the hurried indifference of Milan. The small, intricately carved wooden bird lay forgotten on the grimy platform, a silent witness to the nascent, unforeseen connection that was beginning to form, a fragile seed of possibility planted in the barren landscape of Lorenzo Visconti's shattered dreams. The color of his deceit was a stark, unforgiving black, but perhaps, just perhaps, the taste of forgiveness, or at least a path towards it, might be found in the unexpected warmth emanating from this small, struggling trattoria and the earnest gaze of a young woman named Alessandra. The journey, Lorenzo instinctively knew, was far from over. It was merely taking an unforeseen and potentially perilous turn. The gilded cage of his illusions had been shattered, but the real world, with its harsh realities and unexpected mercies, now lay before him waiting to be navigated. The weight of his past, the sting of betrayal, and the faint glimmer of a new uncertain future coalesced in the cold Milanese air, a silent promise of trials to come. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of something unreadable in Signora Elena's eyes, a fleeting shadow of recognition, or perhaps a calculation. He pushed the thought away, clinging to the small, fragile hope that had just blossomed in the grimy heart of Centrale Station. His survival, his redemption, depended on this chance. However small, however tainted it might prove to be, the stage was set, and the first act of his perilous new life in Milan had just begun. The Trattoria La Speranza was a study in contradictions, much like Lorenzo's new life. By day, it was a symphony of warmth and aroma, the cheerful clatter of ceramic plates, the low murmur of contented patrons, the comforting embrace of garlic, basil, and simmering tomatoes. Copper pots gleamed on hooks like burnished suns, reflecting the golden glow of the ovens, a constant reminder of the honest labor that fueled this small haven. But by night, when the last customer had departed and the clatter of pots had subsided, a different kind of quiet settled over the place. It was a silence thick with secrets, where the scent of baking bread seemed to intertwine with the faint, metallic tang of deceit. Lorenzo, outwardly, was a model of diligent servitude. His hands, once accustomed to guiding the tender shoots of Sangiovese vines, now wielded scrub brushes and dishcloths with grim efficiency. He learned the rhythm of the trattoria by heart, the early morning rush of preparing for lunch, the lull of the afternoon, the vibrant crescendo of the evening service that pulsed with the city's hunger. He moved through the spaces with the practiced ease of one who belongs, his movements fluid, his face a mask of polite attentiveness. Signora Elena, beneath her gruff exterior, grudgingly acknowledged his competence, a flicker of something akin to approval in her dark, assessing eyes. "You work like a Tuscan mule," she'd grumble, a backhanded compliment that Lorenzo understood was the highest praise she could offer. But beneath this placid surface, Lorenzo's mind was a relentless storm. Every word, every glance, every subtle interaction between Signora Elena and Riccardo was meticulously catalogued, scrutinized for cracks in their carefully constructed facade. He became a ghost in the trattoria, his presence a silent observer, his senses heightened to the nuances of their hidden world. Riccardo, the architect of Lorenzo's ruin, frequented the trattoria with an almost unsettling regularity. His expensive cologne, a cloying blend of cedar and ambition, cut sharply through the earthy aromas of the kitchen, a discordant note in the trattoria's humble symphony. He would engage Signora Elena in hushed conversations in the small office just off the kitchen, his smooth voice a serpentine whisper that seemed to coil around her anxieties. When in the public eye, he exuded a forced, almost brittle charm, patronizing Lorenzo with superficial inquiries about his well-being. "Still settling in, young man? Milan is a city of opportunities if one knows where to look," he'd purr, a predator disguised in silk, unaware that his prey was now armed with a chilling awareness. Lorenzo would respond with polite monosyllabic answers, his eyes betraying none of the furious turmoil within, a tightrope walk over a chasm of unspoken animosity. Alessandra remained a confounding enigma. She continued to treat Lorenzo with the same gentle kindness she had shown him on the station platform, a beacon of light in the growing darkness that enveloped him. Her warm brown eyes, like pools of rich Italian earth, held no hint of deceit. Her smile remained genuine and open, radiating an unpretentious beauty that disarmed him. She managed the front of the house with a quiet efficiency, her patience endless, her explanations of dishes peppered with charming anecdotes about the neighborhood and its quirky inhabitants. She spoke of her childhood dreams of opening her own small bakery, a haven of flour and sugar, a world away from the shadows that clung to her mother's business. Lorenzo found himself increasingly drawn to her quiet strength, her unwavering optimism in the face of hardship. He yearned to believe in her sincerity, to trust the warmth in her eyes, to find a pure connection in this tainted world. But the gnawing doubt, fueled by the overheard conversation, lingered like a persistent shadow, whispering its poisonous questions. Could such genuine vulnerability be feigned? Or was she too an unwitting pawn in Riccardo's elaborate game? One particularly busy afternoon, as the trattoria buzzed with the lunchtime rush, a new face appeared, a man who exuded an air of quiet authority. He was impeccably dressed in a dark, well-cut suit, his silver hair neatly combed back, his eyes sharp and observant, like a hawk surveying its territory. He engaged Signora Elena in a hushed conversation at a corner table, his voice low and serious. There was a palpable tension in their interaction, a sense of urgency that seemed to ripple through the trattoria's normally boisterous atmosphere. a discordant note that only Lorenzo, with his heightened senses, could truly discern. Lorenzo, while clearing tables nearby, strained to overhear their words, catching only fragmented whispers. The overdue payments. The collateral. The bank is pressing. Running out of time. Signora Elena's face was etched with worry, her usual sharp demeanor replaced by a visible anxiety that seemed to drain the color from her skin. Ricardo, who arrived shortly after, joined their conversation, his usual charm replaced by a forced, almost brittle, confidence like a cracked porcelain doll. The interaction left Lorenzo with a profound sense of unease. It hinted at financial troubles far beyond the trattoria's usual struggles, a deeper current of desperation flowing beneath the surface. Could this be the debt Ricardo had mentioned? And what was the collateral? The trattoria itself? Alessandra's future? The questions swirled in his mind, adding another layer of complexity to the already treacherous landscape. Later that evening, as Lorenzo and Alessandra were cleaning the kitchen together, a comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated only by the clatter of dishes and the rhythmic swish of the mop. The scent of lingering garlic and warm bread dough filled the air, a familiar comfort. Alessandra, her brow furrowed in thought as she scrubbed a stubborn pot, suddenly broke the silence, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "Lorenzo," she said, her gaze fixed on the soapy water in the sink. "You seem different lately, more quiet. Is everything all right?" Her genuine concern, so evident in her warm brown eyes, pierced through Lorenzo's carefully constructed wall of indifference, like a ray of sunlight finding its way through thick clouds. He hesitated, his mind warring between the desperate desire to confide in her, to seek solace in her apparent sincerity, and the gnawing suspicion that she might be part of the deception. A beautiful rose with thorns concealed beneath its petals. He settled for a carefully neutral response, a shield against his swirling emotions. "Just tired, Alessandra. It's been a long few weeks and Milan is a demanding city." Alessandra turned to face him, her gaze searching, her empathy a palpable force. "You work so hard. Mama appreciates it, you know. She doesn't always show it, but she does. She talks about you, about how much you've helped." "Signora Elena has been fair," Lorenzo replied, choosing his words carefully, his tone measured. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped Alessandra's lips, a whisper of a burden carried unseen. "She carries a lot of worries. The trattoria, it's been harder lately. Ever since Papa..." Her voice trailed off, a shadow passing over her face, like a cloud briefly eclipsing the sun. She quickly composed herself, but the momentary vulnerability was not lost on Lorenzo, her father. He remembered the cryptic conversation in the office, the veiled hints of a past tragedy. It was then that Lorenzo decided to test the waters, to see if he could glean any information, any hint of her knowledge, any crack in her innocent facade. "Ricardo seems to be around quite often," he said casually, wiping down a countertop, his voice deceptively light. "He seems close to your mother." A subtle shift occurred in Alessandra's demeanor, a subtle tightening of her jaw, a fleeting flicker in her eyes, like a bird taking sudden flight. Her gaze flickered away for a moment, a barely perceptible shadow crossing her face before she quickly masked it with a neutral expression. They have known each other for a long time," she said, her voice a little too even, a little too devoid of inflection, like a carefully smoothed-over wrinkle in a perfect cloth. The slight hesitation, the carefully neutral tone, it was enough to reignite Lorenzo's deepest suspicions, a tiny spark igniting a fire of doubt. Was she protecting her mother, or was she too entangled in Ricardo's web, a silken thread binding her to his dark schemes? The ambiguity was a painful thorn in his side, a constant ache in his heart. Days bled into weeks, the rhythm of the trattoria a constant backdrop to Lorenzo's internal turmoil. He continued to work diligently, earning Signora Elena's grudging respect, while silently piecing together the fragments of the overheard conversations and the unsettling interactions he had witnessed. He noticed the subtle ways Ricardo would manipulate Signora Elena, a puppeteer pulling strings, playing on her anxieties, offering false promises wrapped in smooth, poisonous words. He saw the desperation in Signora Elena's eyes, a woman caught in a trap of her own making, struggling against invisible bonds. And then there was Alessandra. Her kindness remained a constant, a beacon of warm light in the growing darkness that surrounded Lorenzo. She shared her simple dreams with him, of a small bakery filled with the aroma of her own creations, of a life free from the constant financial worries that plagued her mother. Lorenzo found himself increasingly drawn to her quiet resilience, her unwavering optimism in the face of hardship. He desperately wanted to believe in her sincerity, to trust the warmth in her eyes, to find sanctuary in her innocence. But the nagging doubt, fueled by her carefully neutral response about Ricardo, lingered like a persistent shadow, threatening to consume the fragile connection they were building. One late evening, as Lorenzo was helping Alessandra prepare dough for the next day's bread, their hands brushed. A spark, unexpected and undeniable, flickered between them, a sudden current that jolted through Lorenzo. Alessandra's cheeks flushed slightly, and she quickly pulled her hand away, a faint tremor running through her. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a fragile moment of connection that both thrilled and terrified Lorenzo. This burgeoning attraction, so pure and genuine, stood in stark contrast to the rotten core of deceit he was uncovering. As he kneaded the dough, the rhythmic push and pull of familiar comfort, Lorenzo found his thoughts returning to Alessandra's father, the shadow that seemed to fall over her whenever he was mentioned. He had heard snippets of local gossip, hushed whispers in the trattoria, about a tragic accident years ago, a boating incident, but Signora Elena's anxious words to Ricardo, "No more," those kinds of ventures, echoed in his mind like a chilling prophecy. He recalled the sharp-suited man at the corner table, the mention of collateral. What if the collateral wasn't just the trattoria, but the very lifeblood of the family, tied to a death that was anything but accidental? Driven by a cold, desperate need for answers, Lorenzo began subtly probing, asking older patrons about Alessandra's father. The answers were vague, clouded by time and reluctance. A good man, but easily led. He had big dreams, too big for a humble trattoria. The puzzle pieces were there, scattered and incomplete, but they suggested a pattern far more sinister than a mere accident. Ricardo, always the smooth talker, always the grand schemer. Lorenzo felt a cold dread coil in his stomach. If Ricardo had been involved in the father's death, if Signora Elena knew, what kind of darkness truly lay beneath the surface of this seemingly warm trattoria? One night, unable to sleep, Lorenzo decided to take a risk. He knew Signora Elena kept her personal papers, including old business records, in a locked desk drawer in her office. It was a desperate gamble, but the whispers in the walls, the tightening noose around the trattoria, and the chilling thought of Alessandra being unwittingly involved in a web of such profound evil pushed him to act. Under the cloak of deepest night, when the trattoria was silent and still, save for the distant hum of the city, Lorenzo crept to the office door. It was locked, as expected, but he remembered Alessandra once mentioning a spare key hidden for emergencies, tucked away behind a loose brick in the fireplace hearth in the main dining room. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. His fingers, surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him, found the loose brick. Behind it, nestled in the cool, dusty cavity, was a small, tarnished brass key. He retrieved it, the cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of his trembling hand. He returned to the office door, inserted the key, and with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the silent trattoria, the lock yielded. The door creaked open, revealing the small, dimly lit office. He slipped inside, his every sense on high alert, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. He located the desk. The top drawer was indeed locked. He fumbled with the key, his fingers brushing against something unexpected, a tiny, almost invisible etching on the underside of the desk drawer. It was the same intricate wooden bird design, a familiar motif, his grandmother's bird, Alessandra's bird. A cold wave washed over him. Could it be? He ignored it, focusing on the lock. The key fit. As he pulled open the drawer, The contents were mundane at first. Ledgers, receipts, old menus. But beneath them, tucked into a false bottom that was almost imperceptible, he found a bundle of faded, official-looking documents. He pulled them out, his eyes scanning the Italian script in the dim light filtering from the hallway. There were loan agreements, bank statements, and most damning of all, a series of complex intertwined contracts for agricultural investments, some bearing Riccardo Rossi's signature, others bearing the signature of Giovanni Rossi. Giovanni. The name hit him like a physical blow. Not Riccardo. Riccardo was the operator, the silver-tongued charmer. But Giovanni, the primary signature, the deep, intricate web of deceit, the true mastermind. And then he saw the date. The dates of these contracts predated his own encounter with Riccardo by years, and one of them, a particularly large loan, was dated just weeks before the tragic accident that claimed Alessandra's father. Lorenzo's blood ran cold. The pieces of the puzzle, fragmented and scattered, now clicked into place with horrifying precision, forming a monstrous mosaic of calculated deception that stretched back years. It wasn't just about his inheritance. It was about their inheritance. It was about Giovanni Rossi, the architect of a sprawling criminal enterprise, and Riccardo was merely his lieutenant, his public face. The tragedy of Alessandra's father, the mounting debt of Signora Elena, the desperate hope of Lorenzo, all were threads expertly woven into a single dark tapestry of exploitation and betrayal. He looked at the papers, his hands trembling. The trattoria wasn't just a cover for Riccardo. It was entangled in a generational web of deceit, a legacy of corruption that had cost lives. The wooden bird, a symbol of innocence and connection, now felt like a cruel irony, a silent witness to a truth far darker than he had imagined. His heart thundered in his chest, not just with anger but with a chilling realization. He was not merely a victim. He was standing at the precipice of a dangerous, deadly secret, and Alessandra, the kind, hopeful Alessandra, was unknowingly living at its very heart. The gilded cage had more bars than he could ever have conceived, and the shadows within were far deeper, far more ancient, than his own recent misfortune. The silence of the trattoria, once comforting, now felt like the held breath of a sleeping monster. The small, dimly lit office of Trattoria La Speranza felt less like a sanctuary and more like an interrogation chamber, the silence heavy with the ghosts of forgotten dreams and whispered betrayals. Lorenzo clutched the faded documents in his trembling hands. The names Giovanni Rossi and Riccardo Rossi burned into his vision like brands. The revelation of Giovanni as the true mastermind, the deeper generational layers of deceit, had twisted the knot in his stomach into a cold, hard stone. His own betrayal, once a singular agony, was now merely a thread in a vast, dark tapestry that had ensnared this family for years. The memory of Alessandra's gentle smile, her innocent dreams of a bakery, now felt like a cruel mockery, a fragile bird caught in a predator's web. He returned the key to its hiding place, his movements as silent as a phantom, the small brass key a weightier object than any coin in his empty satchel. Sleep was a distant, unattainable luxury. The air in his cramped storage room, usually a comforting warmth, now felt suffocating, thick with the unsaid truths he had unearthed. The wooden bird sitting innocently on his makeshift nightstand seemed to mock him with its untainted beauty. He paced the tiny room, the walls closing in, his mind racing through scenarios, each one more fraught with peril than the last. He couldn't stay silent. The truth gnawed at him like a wild animal. But how could he confront Signora Elena without endangering himself? And more importantly, Alessandra. The next morning, the aroma of brewing coffee and fresh bread seemed almost sacrilegious. Lorenzo moved through his duties with an intensified calm, his facade of diligent service now a finely honed weapon. He observed Signora Elena, her face etched with the usual lines of weariness, but now to his sharpened eyes, he could see the subtle flicker of fear in her gaze, a nervous tremor in her hands as she counted the day's earnings. She was a woman, trapped, that much was clear, but her complicity remained a burning question. The opportunity came unexpectedly, after the lunch rush had subsided, and Alessandra had gone to the market for fresh produce. Signora Elena was in the office, her back to the slightly ajar door, engrossed in a ledger, her shoulders slumped with the weight of unseen burdens. The moment hung in the air, thick and charged, like static before a storm. Lorenzo walked to the office door, his heart thundering against his ribs, a drumbeat of desperate courage. He took a deep breath, the scent of olive oil and old paper filling his lungs, and pushed the door open fully. Signora Elena startled, her head snapping up, her dark eyes narrowing instantly. "Lorenzo, what do you want? Don't you have work to do?" Her voice was sharp, a shield immediately deployed. "Signora Elena," Lorenzo began, his voice steady, though his palms were sweating. He held up the small, intricately carved wooden bird he had retrieved from the station that day, a silent testament to their first encounter, and perhaps a symbol of the buried truth. "I found this at the station, Signora. It fell from Alessandra's apron." Signora Elena's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of warmth, then hardened again, suspicion returning. "It's a trifle, a child's trinket. Why are you bringing it to me now?" "It reminds me of my grandmother's carvings," Lorenzo continued, ignoring her dismissive tone, his gaze unwavering. "And it reminded me of Tuscany, of honesty, of innocence." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, weighted with unspoken meaning. "Things that seem very far away from here, Signora, especially after what I found." A tremor ran through Signora Elena's frame. Her face, usually a mask of stoicism, paled slightly. "Found? What are you talking about, ragazzo? Are you accusing me of something?" Her voice was a low growl, but Lorenzo detected a tremor of fear beneath the anger. He stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch echoed like a pronouncement. "I found the loan agreement, Signora," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "and the contracts for agricultural investments, the ones signed by Giovanni Rossi, and the dates, Signora, especially the one signed weeks before Alessandra's father accidentally drowned." The color drained from Signora Elena's face, leaving it ashen, stark as a winter landscape. She recoiled, slightly, clutching the edge of her desk, her knuckles white, her eyes, wide with a raw primal fear, locked onto his, a silent scream trapped within their depths. The scent of old paper in the office now felt suffocating, choking the air. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice barely audible, a desperate attempt at defiance. "You have no right! This is family business!" "Family business that stole my future, Signora," Lorenzo retorted, his voice rising, a controlled surge of anger. "Family business that cost a man his life. Family business that is dragging you and Alessandra down into a pit of lies and debt. Don't pretend you don't know, Signora. I heard you. You and Riccardo. The one from Tuscany. Too easy. Almost a shame. And no more those kinds of ventures." Signora Elena crumpled, the fight draining from her as if a vital thread had been cut. She sank into her chair, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking. The mask of the formidable trattoria owner fell away, revealing a woman consumed by despair and guilt. The air in the small room grew thick with her unspoken suffering. He ruined us," she whispered, her voice broken, a fragile echo of the gruff woman he knew. "Giovanni, he promised a new life after my husband passed. He said he would help me save the trattoria, clear the debts. He was so charming, so convincing, like a serpent's song." She lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a pain so profound it seemed to cleave Lorenzo's heart. "He entangled my husband too, years ago. Marco. He always had big dreams, too trusting. Giovanni lured him into shady deals, promising vast fortunes. Marco believed him, just as you did. And when those deals went south, when the debts mounted, Marco panicked. He tried to pull out, threatened to expose Giovanni. And then, the accident." Her voice caught, a sob tearing through her. "It wasn't an accident, Lorenzo. It was Giovanni." He silenced him. and he made it look like a tragic boating mishap. Lorenzo felt a cold, hard knot of dread twist in his gut. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity, forming a monstrous mosaic of calculated deception and murder. Riccardo was merely the public face. Giovanni was the true puppeteer, his strings reaching from the grave. The image of Alessandra's father, a ghost he had never known, now materialized before him, a victim of the same poisoned well that had swallowed his own inheritance. After his death, Giovanni came to me, Signora Elena continued, her voice raw, each word a shard of glass. He offered to take over Marco's debts, to protect me and Alessandra, to save the trattoria. But it was a trap, a golden cage. He made me complicit. He laundered money through the trattoria, small amounts at first, then larger. He manipulated me, threatened Alessandra. He always knew what I treasured most. He was a master of control, a spider weaving a web. I tried to resist, but he always found a way to tighten the noose. He told me that if I didn't cooperate, Alessandra would pay the price. He made me choose between her safety and my soul. A tear, hot and heavy, tracked a path through the flower smudge on her cheek. When Riccardo, Giovanni's son, contacted you, Lorenzo, it was all part of their plan, to bring in new unsuspecting money, to expand their net. I tried to warn you, in my own way, but I was too afraid, too trapped. The sheer scale of the deception, the generational reach of its tendrils, sickened Lorenzo. He had underestimated the depth of their depravity. His initial anger at Riccardo now solidified into a cold, righteous fury at the entire Rossi family. But then, a sharp metallic clang echoed from the kitchen, followed by a gasp. The office door, which Lorenzo had carefully closed, now stood ajar. And standing there, her eyes wide with shock and horror, her face ashen, was Alessandra. A tray, of freshly baked biscotti, lay shattered at her feet, scattered like brittle bones. She had returned from the market, drawn by the muffled, intense voices, and had heard everything. Every agonizing word. "Mama?" Alessandra's voice was a barely audible whisper, a fragile thread of sound that snapped under the weight of the revelations. Her warm brown eyes, usually pools of empathy, were now dilated with terror, swimming with unshed tears. "Papa, not an accident? You knew? And Lorenzo, was he part of this too?" The last words were aimed at Lorenzo, a desperate, heart-wrenching plea for him to deny the monstrous truth. Lorenzo felt a cruel irony twist his gut. The one person he desperately wanted to protect, the one person he was beginning to feel a profound connection with, now stood before him, her world collapsing around her, and he was inextricably linked to the very tormentors. The bitterness of betrayal, the raw agony of shattered illusions, now reflected tenfold in Alessandra's devastated gaze. Signora Elena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, her eyes fixed on her daughter, a look of profound anguish etched on her face. "Alessandra mia cara, no, I wanted to protect you." "Protect me?" Alessandra cried, her voice rising, laced with an almost unbearable pain. "By lying to me my entire life? By living under the roof of the man who killed Papa? By bringing a stranger into this mess? You let him steal from Lorenzo, Mama. How could you?" Her voice broke, dissolving into ragged sobs that tore at Lorenzo's soul like sharp claws. She stumbled back, her gaze darting between her sobbing mother and Lorenzo, a mix of horror, betrayal, and a desperate, fragile question in her eyes. The scent of sweet biscotti, now crushed and mingled with the bitter tang of tears, filled the air, a sickening contrast. The quiet trattoria, usually a sanctuary of warmth and food, had transformed into a crucible of raw emotion. The gilded cage of illusions had shattered completely, not just for Lorenzo, but now, catastrophically, for Alessandra. The truth, like a tidal wave, had crashed down, leaving only wreckage. Lorenzo watched her, his own pain eclipsed by hers. Her innocent belief in the world, in her family, had been brutally torn apart. The complicated relationship he had sensed between Signora Elena and Alessandra now made perfect, agonizing sense. The mother, trapped by fear and debt, had chosen silence, a decision that now brought agonizing consequences. The small wooden bird, the symbol of their first connection, lay forgotten in Lorenzo's pocket, a stark reminder of the innocent hope that had been twisted by the color of deceit. The stage was set, not just for vengeance, but for a harrowing journey through the taste of forgiveness, a bitter elixir that might, one day, cleanse their souls. The shattered biscotti on the trattoria floor mirrored Alessandra's fractured world. The scent of sweet pastries, once a comforting embrace, now mingled with the bitter tang of raw truth, a sickening alchemy. Lorenzo watched her, his heart aching with a pain that transcended his own betrayal. Her sobs, raw and guttural, echoed in the silent office, a symphony of agony. Signora Elena, crumpled in her chair, reached out a trembling hand towards her daughter, a gesture of desperate comfort that Alessandra recoiled from as if burned. "Alessandra, please," Signora Elena pleaded, her voice hoarse. "I did it for you. To protect you. He would have taken everything, even you." "Protect me?" Alessandra whispered, her voice a razor's edge of disbelief. "By letting the man who killed Papa walk free? By helping him steal from innocent people like Lorenzo? What kind of protection is that, Mama? What kind of life is this?" Her eyes, once warm brown pools, were now stormy, turbulent, reflecting the chaos within. "You built a cage around me, Mama, a gilded cage, and you called it safety." The accusation, sharp as a dagger, hung in the air. Lorenzo felt a strange, profound shift within himself. His initial thirst for vengeance, once a singular consuming fire, now shared space with a surging wave of empathy for Alessandra. She was not an accomplice. She was another victim, arguably the most deeply wounded. The raw honesty of her pain pierced through his remaining suspicions. He stepped forward, placing a gentle, reassuring hand on Alessandra's shoulder. She flinched, but didn't pull away completely. "Alessandra," Lorenzo said, his voice soft but firm, "your mother is trapped, just as I was, just as your father was. But now, we know the truth. And knowing the truth is the first step towards breaking free." Alessandra looked at him, her eyes searching, a desperate plea for reassurance. You knew about Giovanni?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I found documents last night," Lorenzo admitted, the weight of the confession heavy. On his tongue, contracts signed by Giovanni Rossi dating back years, and hints, whispers about your father. "I came to your mother to confirm. I didn't know she was involved so deeply, or for so long. I only knew Riccardo was a fraud." Signora Elena lifted her head, her gaze meeting Lorenzo's, a flicker of something, akin to gratitude mixed with her shame. "He's right, Alessandra. We are all trapped. But now that you know, perhaps we can fight back." Her voice held a newfound resolve, fragile but present, like a sapling pushing through concrete. Alessandra's gaze swept between them, her mother, broken and weeping, and Lorenzo, the stranger who had been both victim and catalyst. The initial shock slowly began to yield to a desperate clarity. The pain didn't lessen, but it sharpened into a singular focus. Justice. "Fight back?" she echoed, the word tasting foreign on her tongue, yet strangely compelling. "How?" And so, amidst the scattered remnants of a shattered family meal, an unlikely alliance was forged. Three souls, each wounded by the same serpentine deceit, found a fragile common ground. Their shared enemy, Giovanni and Riccardo Rossi, became the crucible in which their disparate pain began to solidify into a singular purpose. The next few days were a tense ballet of clandestine meetings and whispered plans. The trattoria continued, its daily rhythm, a deceptive facade behind which a silent war was being waged. Lorenzo, with his keen mind and newfound detective skills, took the lead. Alessandra, still reeling from the revelations, found solace in action. Her knowledge of the trattoria, her sharp memory for faces and routines, proved invaluable. Signora Elena, fueled by a potent mix of guilt and a desperate yearning for redemption, revealed every detail, every secret transaction, every subtle threat Riccardo had ever made. "Riccardo visits the office every Tuesday evening," Signora Elena revealed. One night her voice hushed as they huddled in the dark kitchen. He collects the earnings, the laundered money. He keeps his own ledger, a smaller, darker one, in a locked compartment under the floorboard beneath his favorite chair in the office. Her eyes gleamed with a desperate fire. He uses a specific key, a silver one, always on his person. He's arrogant, Lorenzo mused, a cold plan forming in his mind. He believes he's untouchable. That's his weakness. Alessandra, her face pale but determined, added, "He often leaves his briefcase unattended on the corner table while he's talking to Mama in the office. He's so busy charming the customers, he doesn't think anyone would dare." "We need proof," Lorenzo asserted, his voice low and steady. "Something undeniable. Documents, ledgers, recordings. Anything that links them directly to these illegal activities and to Giovanni's larger network." He contacted the old family lawyer from Tuscany, a man named Signore Battista, a grizzled veteran who had always held a quiet respect for the Visconti name. Battista, though initially wary of Lorenzo's wild claims, agreed to listen, sensing the desperate earnestness in the young man's voice. Their plan began to take shape, a delicate dance on the edge of a precipice. The next Tuesday, the air in the trattoria was thick with a tension only the three conspirators could feel. Riccardo arrived, his usual swagger amplified by the week's successful transactions. He greeted Signora Elena with a condescending pat on the shoulder, his eyes sweeping over the bustling trattoria with predatory satisfaction. "Ah, Elena, my dear," he purred, his voice dripping with false camaraderie. "Another prosperous week, I trust. The little trattoria continues to be quite productive." His gaze lingered on Lorenzo, a flicker of condescension in his eyes. "And our young Tuscan is proving useful, I see. Such a diligent worker. A pity his family's fortunes withered, but perhaps under my guidance, he can learn to cultivate new kinds of wealth." He chuckled, a chilling sound that grated on Lorenzo's ears. "Indeed, Riccardo," Signora Elena replied, her voice carefully modulated, a performance of feigned deference. "He is quite eager." As Riccardo settled into his favorite corner table, placing his briefcase beside him, Lorenzo exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance with Alessandra. The unspoken signal passed between them, a fragile thread of shared purpose. Riccardo, distracted by a phone call, finally moved to the office, leaving his briefcase momentarily unattended. This was Alessandra's cue. With a newfound boldness, she approached the table, feigning to wipe it down. Her movements were smooth, practiced. Her fingers, accustomed to the delicate art of decorating pastries, now worked with surgical precision. In a swift, almost imperceptible motion, she extracted a small, intricately designed USB drive from her apron pocket and slipped it into the briefcase's side compartment. It was a risky maneuver, a gamble with their freedom, but the desperation in her eyes was a testament to her resolve. She gently nudged the briefcase as if by accident, closer to Riccardo's chair in the office, ensuring he would notice it upon his return. Meanwhile, Lorenzo, feigning to clear tables near the office door, activated a small, almost invisible voice recorder he had hidden in his coat pocket. It was a cheap device, purchased from a back-alley electronics store, but it was their hope. Riccardo's voice, his incriminating words, would be their evidence. "Riccardo," Lorenzo began, stepping casually towards the office door as Riccardo emerged, adjusting his tie. "I've been meaning to ask you about the hydroponics venture. I heard whispers it's not going as smoothly as planned." He deliberately used a tone of innocent curiosity, a bait for the predator. Riccardo paused, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Ah, the Tuscan's little investment," he scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "A minor setback, nothing more. These things take time, boy. You're too impatient, unlike your predecessor." His voice lowered, a sinister chuckle escaping his lips. "Giovanni always preferred a more direct approach to business, less paperwork, more decisive action." He leaned closer, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Let's just say some people are better at disappearing when they become a liability. especially those who get cold feet about their investments. He tapped a finger against his temple, a chilling gesture. A lesson your father, Alessandra, should have learned. Alessandra, who had just entered the dining room with a tray of fresh water, froze. Her face went ashen, her eyes locking onto Ricardo, then onto Lorenzo, a silent terror gripping her. Ricardo, reveling in his perceived power, failed to notice, her presence blinded by his own arrogance. Lorenzo pressed on, his heart pounding. So the hydroponics was just a front, then? For something bigger? Ricardo's smile widened, a smirk of self-satisfaction. A necessary diversion. Giovanni was a genius, you know. He built an empire. We just expanded the network. And you, Lorenzo, you were merely a fruitful branch of that expansion, easily plucked. Almost ashamed to waste such a generous inheritance on a simple facade, but efficiency is key, wouldn't you agree? He chuckled again, a deep, satisfied rumble. At that moment, a figure appeared at the trattoria's entrance. Not a customer, but a man in a crisp suit, flanked by two uniformed carabinieri officers. It was Signore Battista, the lawyer, his face grim. Behind him, two more officers subtly fanned out, their gazes sweeping the room. Ricardo's confident smile faltered. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, darted around the room, registering the presence of the authorities. The color drained from his face as his gaze landed on Lorenzo, then on Signora Elena, and finally on Alessandra, who stood motionless, her eyes filled with a terrifying mix of sorrow and fierce resolve. He understood. The trap had sprung. Signor. Riccardo Rossi! Signor Battista's voice boomed, cutting through the sudden silence of the trattoria like a sharp blade. We have a warrant for your arrest on multiple charges of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. We also have reason to believe you have information regarding the disappearance and suspected murder of Marco Mancini. Ricardo's composure shattered. He lunged for his briefcase, but an officer was quicker, seizing it. Another officer moved to restrain Ricardo as he tried to bolt for the back exit. "You fools! This is a mistake! You have no proof!" he shrieked, his smooth facade cracking, revealing the snarling fear beneath. "We have plenty of proof, Signor Rossi," Signore Battista stated calmly, holding up a small, unassuming USB drive, the one Alessandra had planted. "And we have a detailed confession from a cooperating witness." He glanced pointedly at Signora Elena, who stood by the office door, her shoulders slumped, her gaze fixed on Ricardo with a mixture of fear and a fragile, nascent peace. Ricardo struggled, cursing, as the officers efficiently cuffed him. The trattoria, usually a place of joyous noise, was now silent, all eyes fixed on the spectacle. Lorenzo watched, a strange emptiness settling in his chest. The initial surge of triumph was fleeting, replaced by a hollow realization that justice, while served, could not erase the pain. As Ricardo was led away, his protests fading into the Milanese evening, his last glance fell upon Alessandra. His eyes, devoid of their usual charm, held a raw, chilling hatred, a promise of lingering malice. Alessandra flinched, but then slowly, defiantly she met his gaze, a quiet strength blooming in her eyes. The terror was still there, but now it was tempered by a steely resolve. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Officers swarmed the trattoria, collecting evidence, questioning Signora Elena. Lorenzo gave his statement, detailing Ricardo's initial fraud. Signora Elena, her voice shaking but clear, recounted her years of forced complicity, detailing Giovanni's manipulations and the truth behind Marco Mancini's death. She provided names, dates, and locations, weaving a damning narrative that would likely bring down Giovanni's entire network. Alessandra stood silently beside Lorenzo, her hand finding his, her fingers intertwining. The touch was a quiet anchor in the storm. Her world had been ripped apart, her family's dark secrets exposed to the harsh light of truth. But in that moment, as the police sirens wailed in the distance, carrying Riccardo Rossi away, Lorenzo felt a profound sense of purpose that transcended his own revenge. They had done it. They had struck a blow against the deceit. But the fight, he knew, was far from over. Signora Elena still faced consequences, and Alessandra, his Alessandra, was left with a shattered past and an uncertain future. The taste of deceit was still bitter on their tongues, but perhaps, just perhaps, the first tentative notes of forgiveness, of healing, could now begin to emerge from the ruins. The long night was over, but the dawn would bring new challenges, new griefs, and perhaps a new kind of hope. The trattoria, so recently a stage for the raw drama of betrayal and confession, now hummed with a different kind of energy. The immediate aftermath of Ricardo's arrest was a whirlwind of police investigations, legal proceedings, and the harsh glare of public scrutiny. The media, like vultures drawn to fresh carrion, descended upon La Speranza, their flashing cameras and intrusive questions threatening to consume the fragile peace that had just begun to settle. But amidst the chaos, a new foundation was being laid, one built not on secrets, but on shared vulnerability and a desperate, burgeoning hope. Signora Elena, stripped bare of her facade, stood tall before the law. Her confession, painful yet resolute, was a torrent of truth that helped dismantle Giovanni Rossi's sprawling criminal network. She revealed details about shell corporations, dummy accounts, and key players, her memory sharpened by years of suppressed terror. Her cooperation, coupled with the damning evidence Lorenzo and Alessandra had helped gather, secured convictions for Giovanni and his remaining accomplices, exposing the generational rot that had festered beneath Milan's gleaming surface. Giovanni Rossi, the true architect of so much misery, was brought to justice, his empire of deceit finally crumbling. However, justice, like a double-edged sword, did not spare Signora Elena entirely. Her complicity, however forced, could not be erased. She received a reduced sentence due to her extensive cooperation, a period of incarceration that, though brief, felt like an eternity to Alessandra. The day Signora Elena was led away, her small bag clutched in her hands, was perhaps the most heartbreaking. Alessandra clung to her mother, tears streaming down her face, a silent apology for the years of unspoken truths, and a promise of unwavering love. Lorenzo stood by, a steady presence, his hand resting on Alessandra's back, a silent testament to the fragile yet unbreakable bond that had formed between them. With Signora Elena gone, the weight of La Speranza fell squarely on Alessandra's shoulders. The trattoria, her childhood sanctuary, now felt like a titanic responsibility. She faced a torrent of challenges, dwindling customers spooked by the scandal, skeptical suppliers, and the sheer emotional exhaustion of navigating her mother's betrayal and her father's tragic death. Yet, Alessandra, once seen by Lorenzo as a gentle, somewhat naive soul, blossomed into a formidable force. Her resilience, a quiet strength that had always been present beneath her gentle demeanor, now shone brightly. Her hands, calloused from years of kneading dough and serving customers, now managed ledgers, negotiated with suppliers, and cooked with a fervor born of desperation and love. The scent of yeast and simmering sauce became her armor, her defiance against the shadows of the past. Lorenzo, true to his word, became her unwavering anchor. He stayed at the trattoria, no longer a hidden investigator, but a partner in every sense of the word. He worked tirelessly, his aristocratic hands now stained with flour and olive oil, his mind perpetually focused on supporting Alessandra. He managed the finances, handled the more demanding customers, and even took to experimenting with new dishes, infusing the traditional Milanese fare with subtle Tuscan influences. His presence was a quiet strength, a reassuring balm against the constant anxieties that threatened to overwhelm Alessandra. In the quiet hours after the trattoria closed, as they cleaned together, a new kind of intimacy blossomed between them. It wasn't born of grand gestures, but of shared burdens, silent understanding, and the raw honesty that emerged from the ashes of deceit. They spoke for hours, sometimes about the trattoria, sometimes about the past, sometimes about their dreams. Alessandra recounted vivid, tender memories of her father, painting a picture of a dreamer, a man with a passion for new ideas, unknowingly caught in Giovanni Rossi's snare. Lorenzo, in turn, shared stories of his Tuscan vineyard, the beauty of the rolling hills, and the gnawing pain of its loss. Their hands would often brush as they worked, a familiar spark igniting a warmth that spread through Lorenzo's chest, chasing away the lingering chill of betrayal. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Alessandra, her face smudged with flour, leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Thank you, Lorenzo," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For not leaving. For helping me pick up the pieces." Lorenzo wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "You don't have to face this alone, Alessandra," he murmured, his lips brushing her hair. "You never did." In that moment, amidst the lingering scent of baked bread and simmering sauce, their lips met, a tender, tentative kiss that sealed a promise of healing and hope. It was a kiss born not of fleeting passion, but of shared scars, mutual respect, and a profound, quiet love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of places. The trattoria slowly began to recover. Word of Signora Elena's cooperation, and the tragic circumstances of her involvement, gradually seeped into the community. Customers, initially wary, started to return, drawn by the authenticity of the food and the quiet resilience of Alessandra and Lorenzo. La Speranza, once a name whispered with suspicion, became a symbol of tenacity, a testament to the power of a family rebuilding itself from the ground up. When Signora Elena returned, her eyes held a profound weariness, but also a newfound humility. The prison, a cold, unyielding place, had stripped her of her defenses, leaving her raw but also, strangely, free. Alessandra, no longer a child seeking protection, embraced her mother with a fierce, unconditional love. There were still painful conversations, tears shed, and unspoken apologies hung in the air. But the bridge between them was slowly, painstakingly, being rebuilt, brick by painful brick. Lorenzo watched, a silent witness to their reconciliation, understanding that true forgiveness was a complex, arduous journey, not a singular destination. It was an ongoing act of choosing empathy over bitterness, of accepting the imperfections of those you loved, even when their choices had caused immense pain. Lorenzo, having successfully recovered a portion of his stolen inheritance through legal proceedings against the Rossi estate, made a profound decision. He didn't want to rebuild his life in Tuscany, haunted by the specter of what he had lost. Instead, he wanted to invest in the future he was building here, in Milan, with Alessandra. He poured a significant portion of his recovered funds into La Speranza, modernizing the kitchen, expanding the dining area, and most importantly, funding Alessandra's long-held dream, her very own bakery. The Sweet Spot, Alessandra named it, a charming little bakery next door to the trattoria, its windows filled with golden brown pastries and the comforting glow of freshly baked bread. It was a haven of flour and sugar, a place where her artistic soul could finally take flight. The sweet aroma, a stark contrast to the bitter scent of betrayal that had once permeated their lives, now filled the air, a constant reminder of transformation and hope. Years melted into a tapestry of shared joys and everyday challenges. La Speranza thrived, becoming a beloved Milanese institution. The Sweet Spot flourished, Alessandra's unique creations drawing customers from across the city. Lorenzo, no longer just a partner, became Alessandra's husband, their wedding. A small intimate affair celebrated in the trattoria, surrounded by the warmth of their new unconventional family. Their home, nestled above the trattoria, became a sanctuary of laughter and love. 2 children graced their lives. A daughter, Sofia, with Alessandra's warm brown eyes and a mischievous glint, and a son, Matteo, with Lorenzo's stormy blue eyes and an adventurous spirit. They grew up in the comforting chaos of the trattoria, learning the scent of fresh herbs and yeast, the sound of contented diners, and the quiet strength of their parents. The shadows of the past, though never fully erased, receded into distant corners of their lives. Riccardo Rossi eventually died in prison, his legacy one of bitterness and ruin. Giovanni Rossi remained incarcerated, a name whispered only as a cautionary tale. Occasionally, a wistful glance from Signora Elena, or a momentary stillness in Alessandra's eyes, would betray a flicker of the pain they had endured, but it was always fleeting, quickly replaced by the vibrant present, by the laughter of their children, and the comforting hum of their thriving businesses. On quiet evenings, as the children slept, Lorenzo and Alessandra would sometimes sit by, the crackling fireplace, the small wooden bird, now polished and cherished, placed prominently on the mantelpiece. They would recount their story, not in full, but in fragmented memories, to Sofia and Matteo. They spoke of the importance of honesty, the destructive power of greed, and the long, arduous journey of forgiveness. The color of deceit, Lorenzo would explain, his voice gentle, is a very dark, ugly shade, my dears. It can blind you to the truth and hurt those you love. But the taste of forgiveness, Alessandra would add, taking his hand, her eyes soft, is like the sweetest, warmest bread, fresh from the oven. It's difficult to make, sometimes it burns, but when it's done right, it can fill your heart with so much warmth, so much peace. Their lives were not without scars, but those scars were no longer wounds. They were etched maps, guiding them forward, reminding them of the trials overcome and the resilience forged in the crucible of suffering. Lorenzo Visconti, the betrayed nobleman, had found not just his fortune, but something infinitely more valuable, a family, a purpose, and the profound transformative taste of forgiveness. The trattoria, La Speranza, a name that once meant hope but felt ironic, now truly embodied its name, not just for its patrons, but for the family who had dared to rebuild their lives within its venerable walls, transforming shadows into sunlight and bitterness into the sweetest taste of all. The circle, though marked by tragedy, had found a semblance of closure, not in retribution alone, but in the quiet, enduring promise of a shared future, woven with threads of truth, resilience, and unconditional love. Commentary. Thank you for listening to The Color of Deceit, The Taste of Forgiveness. We hope this story has resonated with you and perhaps offered some food for thought. At its heart, this narrative explores the destructive nature of deceit and the long, intricate shadows cast by the past. We witness how bitterness and the initial thirst for revenge can consume individuals, yet Lorenzo's journey is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. He finds purpose and a profound, unexpected love even after suffering profound betrayal, illustrating that even in the deepest despair, new life can bloom. The story also highlights the complexities of forgiveness. It's not presented as a simple, instantaneous act, but rather a gradual, arduous process of understanding, empathy, and ultimately, the conscious choice to let go of the corrosive power of hatred. The unexpected bond Lorenzo forms with Alessandra and her family underscores the idea that even in the face of loss and deception, new connections and a different kind of family can offer profound solace and a path forward to a truly meaningful life. We hope you've enjoyed Lorenzo's journey and the intricate web of relationships and secrets he navigated. If you found this story compelling, please consider leaving a comment, hitting the like button, and subscribing to our channel for more engaging narratives. Thank you for your support.